Hello everyone, this is Marc Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore. I'd like to welcome you to the MuseScore Café. So this is my regular series where we talk about some aspect of making music using MuseScore. I do this every Wednesday. We learn a lot in the process and hopefully have some fun. So we pick a different topic, or I pick a topic anyhow, and to talk about. And the first week of the month, which is next week, is going to be Ask Me Anything session. So we could be talking about anything next week. You can just have your questions ready and post scores if you need me to look at scores. Today we're going to be talking about drums and percussion and both how to actually enter notes onto percussion saves, that's part of it, but also maybe more how to write effectively for percussion. This has come up in the context of my musicianship skills workshop, where this week's lesson I talked about actually producing a drum chart for a Beatles song, showing how to transcribe what Ringo played and produce an appropriately readable transcription of it for other people. And so I want to talk a little bit more about my process here. So thanks. I love it when I have people checking in here and letting us know where you're coming from. So yeah, we're going to be talking about percussion. So I'm going to show you a couple of things. First of all, first thing I want to do actually is flip over to where I actually have the actually I'm just going to open my chart. I have my chart for Ticket to Ride that I used in the musicianship skills workshop. And I'm just going to I'm just going to show you the chart here. And I'm going to show you how I entered those things in that lesson this week. I talked about why I did things, but I'm going to talk about that a little bit more today for everyone's benefit. So there's basically three kinds of things that you're going to see here. One is measures in which every note is written out. This is, that's what we're used to writing, right? I mean, if you're writing music, that's what you generally write. You write out everything. Um, when I say when you're writing music, I mean in a classical context or in most kind of contexts that you're using MuseScore, you put every note down. But in any sort of jazz or rock context, that's not a given. It is not a given that you would be actually writing out every note. So often there's things like what we're seeing for the melody here, where I just wrote out the melody and some chord symbols, and that's enough for singers and guitar players and bass players to then construct their own part. For the drummer, if they already know the song, well, then they can probably figure out what they want to figure out by ear if they know the song well and spend some time preparing. My task here is to produce a part that is readable by a drummer who doesn't already know the song well. Maybe they've heard it before, but they've never really thought through what is the drummer doing on this. And so I want to show how to convey the necessary information to the drummer. So along the way, we will absolutely learn how to get all the notes in there. But I also want to show things like this measure here, where we just have slashes and rhythms on top. This is what is more typically notated for actual drum set players as opposed to like orchestral percussion players. In an orchestral setting, you're going to write out every note. In a jazz or rock setting, you're more likely going to give them a part that basic groove and the form of the piece and lets them work from there. So I want to show you how to enter both of these notations, and then often we're going to just see these measure repeats. That means just repeat the previous measure, because that is a big thing that happens in a lot of music, right? The drummer's going to establish a groove and then just keep it going. So that's really easy to do. To do those, you're just going to add them from the repeats palette. So done with that one. But what I'm going to do first is I'm going to actually enter this measure right here. Okay? So I'm going to enter this guy into a new score. So first I'm going to come to I'll just take my default score here and I'll press I. Wait a minute, I had my keyboard logger thing going and then I closed it down. So let me reopen it. So I pressed I to open the instruments dialog, and now under percussion unpitched, I'm going to select drum set. So now I have my drum set. And oh, so here's another thing. And Dave, I know this came up for you also. The order of this has the drum set above piano, which seems very weird to me, but this is in an orchestral setting. All the percussion instruments come before piano, or all the unpitched percussion comes before piano. That's orchestral ordering. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my back to that same dialogue and change it from orchestral ordering to rock band ordering. I could pick jazz combo or one of these other ones also. And that will automatically, I thought it would rearrange them. So that's weird that rock band didn't do it that way, but jazz did. I think rock band is wrong. I think that just doesn't make any sense at all. So, yeah. But the jazz ordering definitely has piano above drum set. Anyhow, let's go ahead and enter those notes. So what I'm going to do is look at this. First, I want to talk some about the overall structure of this drum notation here. Okay? And when I say overall structure, what I mean is notice that it's entered in two voices, which you can see easily when I have this selected. You can see the blue notes and you can see the green notes, right? Blue notes stem up, green notes stem down. There are lots of different ways of entering, of notating drum music. And I don't want to give you the idea there is only one proper way. What I will tell you is of all the ways that exist, some are more common than others, some are easier to explain than others, and some are easier to do in MuseScore than others. So I'm going to show you the way that's really the easiest to deal with, both in terms of MuseScore and explaining how it works, understanding. Everything about this is designed to be the sort of simplest way of doing things. Then if you're an expert on drum notation and know about the other methods, I'll reference them as well. You can definitely talk about the other methods. But in this simple method that I'm going to talk about, we're going to use two voices. One voice is going to be for the things we do with our hands. The other is going to be that. So that's voice one, stems up. Stems down, voice two is going to be the things we do with our feet. And feet on a drum set basically means bass drum and hi-hat. Those are the two things that we would typically do with our feet. So, and hi-hat is, for people who aren't familiar with the layout of a drum set, you know what a bass drum is. Bass drum is big old drum, but it usually has a foot pedal on a drum set, right? In an orchestra, you're going to hit it with a beater, but in a drum set, you're going to sit at the throne and then have this foot pedal that operates the beater for you. And so the bass drum is done with a foot pedal, and so is the hi-hat. The hi-hat is a set of two cymbals that go that open and close like this with the foot pedal. Now you can also you can also use your sticks on the cymbal with your hands. And when you do that, we're going to notate it in voice one. But the pedal hi-hat, the open-close mechanism, is going to be notated stems down. This particular groove doesn't involve the hi-hat. All right, so what we can see is the hand is going rest, snare, and then a triplet. Rest, bum, bum. And so let's get that started, all right? I'm going to go to the drum set. I will press N for note input mode. And actually, I'm going to do something else here. Close up that inspector, close up that play panel, and oops, not that, this, and bring back my chat window just so I can keep it open while I'm working. All right, not this guy, sorry. I'm doing this. And we're not going to need the palettes here, so I'm going to close that to give myself a little bit more room here. Yes, I'm definitely using MuseScore 3, and it's looking maybe different than you're used to, so let me actually change something else. This is a customized workspace that I've created in which I've stripped out some of the buttons that are normally on the toolbar. This is a comfortable environment for me, but for my demonstrations, I usually like to use a different workspace that I've created that I call Café. And my Café workspace is more the default layout but it allows me to customize things that I need to. Now, the cafe layout is a little bit this is based on the advanced workspace, and it's really got more junk in it here than I need. I don't need quadruple dots and all that, so I'm actually going to simplify my life and go to the basic workspace. And the basic workspace has what I need here. So this is what I'm doing. All right, so what I'm going to do now is go in. I've got my drum set selected. I'll hit N for note input mode. And now I want to start entering that rhythm. And remember, it started with a quarter rest, 5, 0, and there's my quarter rest. And the next thing was a quarter snare. The snare is down here. And by the way, if you didn't know that was snare, let's look at this. You have to kind of know the secret code for drum set notation. And here again, there's different ways of doing this, but it's fairly standardized that this space here, the third space up from the bottom, that space, when used this way with a solid note head and stem up, is snare drum. That's just something you're supposed to know. And there's any number of guides online that will give you keys for that. If you're at all worried the readers of your won't understand that, you can produce your own little key and maybe make that as a graphic, another, and paste it in, or type it in, or however you want to do it. But we're using what's a fairly standardized set of things where a note on that third space, stem up, is snare, bottom space, stem down, is bass drum, and the other lines and spaces are going to be the toms. If that's how a drum set is organized, you got the drum set, you got the bass drum, you got the snare drum, and then you have a set of what are called toms that are just drums that don't have snares of different pitches. And then there's a variety of cymbals. Cymbals we're going to notate using X note heads, and we'll see one of those in a little bit. All right, so I'm going to come back to my score here, go back to note input mode, go back to where I was, because when I switch scores, you lose note input mode. This is my snare, and there's 3 ways of entering drum notes. For the most common drum notes, there's keyboard shortcuts predefined for you: A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. Unfortunately, there's only 7 because MuseScore is kind of hardwired to know there's 7 notes in a scale. We've got 7 shortcuts for entering notes, and those are the ones that get used for drum set. Someday, yeah, we hope to have more shortcuts available while entering drums. It's just no one has bothered to implement that yet. So I'm going to type C. I've still got my quarter note selected, so on the toolbar. So now all I got to do is type C. Oops, did I type C? I didn't mean C. Why did I say C? I don't know, but C obviously is a crash symbol. Control Z to undo. A is my snare drum. The next thing I need is a quarter note triplet. Right? I needed a quarter note triplet. So to do a quarter note triplet, I'll type 6, Control 3. And that gives me, so 6 for the half note. If you don't already know that, you can click the half note, but I'm pretty much always using keyboard shortcuts, as you probably realize. So 6 to select half note, and then Control 3 for triplet. If you can't remember Control 3 for triplet, that's under Add, Tuplets, Triplet. So that's how you can do that. And now I want to actually enter the triplet. And what it was a rest. So, I'm still in the menu. Let me hit escape to get out of the menu. 0 to enter my rest. And then it was 2 notes together. It was snare and a high tom together. So I will enter my snare with A, but now I also want to enter a high tom on top of that. And high tom, the toms there's not shortcuts for all of those, so we can kind of hover over these to see what all these other ones are. That's an electric snare, a low floor tom, a low tom, an open hi-hat with a stick, low mid tom, high mid tom. E is high tom. All right, so E works. So what I can do, if I type E right now, it's going to enter an E after that snare, but I want it together. So I'll use Shift E, and now I've got my high tom. And then the next thing is a lower tom. And unfortunately, those lower toms down here, like here, that low tom doesn't have a shortcut. So I'm going to need to use the palette to enter that. So to enter it from the palette, I'm going to just double click it, and that enters that. And now I'm going to scroll back. I've now finished my voice one. In fact, I'll hit escape and just sort of double check that against my original, right? That's what I had here. Snare, bum, bum, and the triplet is a high tom and a snare, followed by a low tom. And that's what I've got. Rest, snare, and then a triplet, rest, snare accompanied by high tom, followed by low tom. So I've got my voice one done. Well, now I want to enter two. So back to note input mode. Again, I didn't have to leave it and come back other than the fact that I wanted to check. Oh, actually, I need to remind myself, what is it that I'm trying to enter? And yeah, I could do the whole split screen thing. In fact, let's do this. I'm going to take a quick little screenshot. Quick little screenshot here. And now come over here and just paste this puppy in so I have something to look at while I'm entering my stuff. There we go. This is what I'm aiming to enter, and I'll turn off autoplace with equals is the shortcut to turn off autoplay so um, it doesn't cause extra space or anything in the measure. So this is what I'm trying to enter, and oh yeah, I can also resize it to make it smaller if I want. Might as well make it about the same size it's really going to be. There we go. So I have this. Now I want to enter my voice too. So I come down here and input mode, and I want to enter the bass drum part. And if you're using the keyboard shortcuts, then you don't actually have to change voices. MuseScore manages that for you. So you can see this, the shortcut for bass drum is B. All I got to do is say 5 for quarter note, and then B, and then 4 for eighth, 0 for rest, B for another bass drum, and then order, B, another bass drum. So that's basically it. And Chris is asking, all drummers think of fourth line from the bottom as a low tom. Now, here's the deal. I said that there's some standardization. This bottom space is pretty universally understood to be bass drum. This third space up is pretty universally understood to be snare. Beyond that, it gets a little dicier as far as people, what you can absolutely rely on everyone to understand. There's definitely what MuseScore does, its default assignment is very common, and you can pretty well rely on people to understand what's meant if you use it. But you will find published scores that do things differently. But yeah, it's pretty typical to notate the toms on the lines and spaces. The thing is, there could be an arbitrary number of toms, right? Like rototoms is this whole thing where you can rotate them to tension them, and there's some people have like a whole rack full of toms. They'll have one snare drum, one bass drum, but like 5 toms of various different pitches. And so we can go line space, line space, line space, right? We can use all the lines and spaces with upstem notes to indicate the toms. So it's not like anyone necessarily knows exactly which line and space refers to exactly which tom because everyone's drum set is different. But here we can at least see we're talking about a higher tom and a lower tom. Um, there's what are called rack mounted toms, and then there's the floor tom. The floor tom sits on the floor, and the floor tom would typically be notated further down on the staff. So this is saying a higher tom and a lower tom of pitches of your choice. And did we just lose? So my window over here just froze, and so I want to find out if I'm still live. Looks like I'm okay. All right. Just my other computer just decided to freeze up. All right. Fine. All right. Um, so, um, so yeah, there's the tom layout and the cymbal layout gets to be personal because different people's drum sets are different. So, but anyhow, this is a fairly standard thing. So this is a higher tom, that's a lower tom, and it says low tom here, but there's also the floor tom, which is lower still. So when I mention that there's different ways of entering those notes, let me show you more specifically what I mean. We can use the drum palette. So I could, like, let me go to another measure here. If I wanted to enter that snare, I entered the snare by pressing the shortcut A, but I could also double click in the palette to enter as many A's as I want. I could also click the palette once and then click in the score as often as I want. And you don't have to be very accurate about where you click. As long as the snare is selected on the palette, you're just entering snare notes. And then you can also just press R to enter more snare notes, right? And then if I want to start entering a floor tom, here's the floor tom, change to floor tom, and now I'm entering floor tom notes. So the the palette, you either double click to enter a note, or you select in the palette and then click in the score, or use the keyboard shortcut. They all have essentially the same effect. So when it comes to entering the drum notation, that's basically it. I do want to show the other rhythm, um, and so I'll do a screenshot of that also because that was kind of a nice little thing that I did to be able to see what I'm entering while I'm entering it. So capture my image and then I'm going to paste it into this measure here. And I want to enter this guy now. So let's talk about this rhythm. This rhythm is another, kind of typical rock type of rhythm. That thing with the triplets isn't that typical. It's sort of Ringo typical, I would say, because he also uses it on "She Loves You," "She Loves Me." I mean, she loves me, yeah. She loves you. Sorry, she loves you. Who does she love? I don't know. She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. Boom, boom, loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. Boom, boom, loves you, yeah. So, that's uh a Ringoism. I think that quarter note triplet at the end of the measure. It's funny because my dad always used to call that song "She Loves Me," and that's how I think now I still always think of it that way. Um, so let's enter this rhythm now. Um, our toms tuned to specific notes. Um, so yes and no. I mean, they're not going to be pitched clearly enough. They're not designed to be pitched clearly enough that you would really use them that way normally. Um, because they're so rich in the overtones and the way they work, the way percussion instruments are worked, they are not usually tuned to a specific enough note that you would care. But you do tune them. You absolutely tune them to pitches. And people will listen to pitches. They'll ask for a note on the piano to tune their tom to, and then they use the drum key to tune up the head. But you don't actually then try to play the pitches on it. But that said, the floor tom is it's got a big enough head that you can often like use your hand on the head to add tension and remove tension. So what you will see is people hit a note on the floor tom and then use their hand, boom, 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 to change the pitch with their hand. And you can kind of play crude melodies that way. There's a jazz drummer named Ari Honig who's pretty famous for doing that sort of thing. Also, when I mentioned the rototoms that are tunable just by rotating them, it's also some people will occasionally try to play a melody on drums that way. So yes, you absolutely do tune them, but use that you don't typically use that. You just do that to make the drum set sound the way you want it to sound. But you don't like retune it between songs because because you're playing in a different key now. In orchestra timpani, absolutely, you're playing specific pitches. Drum set, not so much. All right, so I'm going to enter this rhythm now. This rhythm here is basically now this is a ride rhythm. These are all cymbals, and I mentioned cymbals are typically X note heads. At least I think I mentioned it. So the rhythm here is going to be all D is the ride cymbal. So I'll type 4 and then D, 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 D. Now, I should have gone back and added the snares in the places where I need a snare. So I'm going to add a snare here by pressing Shift A. And now I'll go back over here and Shift A again. And now I'm going to switch to entering the bass drum. So I'll go back to the beginning of the measure, even though MuseScore would actually do that for me. But I'll go back to the beginning of the measure and type 5B to enter the first one, and then 0 for the rest, and then 2/8 notes, 4BB. And there's that rhythm. So one of the things that I want to emphasize about drum notation here, that's it really messes with the brain the first dozen times you deal with this before it really sinks in, is durations don't matter on drums. And this is a fantastic thing because it allows us to only need two voices. Now, I said we're going to use upper voice for hands, bottom voice for feet, but realistically, we got two hands, right? And they could be doing different things. Um, so, in principle, we might have four different rhythms going on between two hands and 2 feet. But because the duration doesn't matter on the drums, we can get away with a little bit of cheating. So, for instance, this was a snare drum on beat 2 in the first rhythm I entered, and I entered as a quarter note. But in this other measure, it's the same thing. It's a snare drum on beat 2, but I entered it as a eighth note instead of quarter note. Why? Because I had to combine it with the ride, which is playing eighth notes. So you will always enter notes using the longest duration that you can that fits what the other thing is doing. So it's hard to make that make sense. So if you know the ride is going to need eighth notes, we're going to enter the ride in eighth notes, and then the snare is just going to come along and use the same rhythm that the shorter one used. So I should maybe say you're going to use whatever the shortest note value that happens on that beat is. Everything that happens on that beat with the hands, you'll just enter with that same note value, so you can do it in one um, in one voice. And yes, Dave, absolutely, rolls will definitely use long notes. So if I want to show a roll, then I will put in a whole note for my snare, and then I will use the palette. I'll actually open up the palette, and here's where I wish I hadn't switched to the basic workspace, but I'll go back to the advanced workspace now and open up the tremolos palette so I can enter my roll. Now, this is a buzz roll, which is a specific type of roll that's used in marching band music, and it only plays back when using the marching band extension. But there's also all these other rolls, and I'm just going to put in the fastest one I can so that it plays like a roll. It sounds terrible because it's just a whole bunch of 64th notes rather than the actual bounce mechanism, the bouncing that a real roll does. Typically, you'd really notate it with only the three, but that sounds worse. So yes. But the thing is, because the roll is taking two hands, we're saved. Because the whole reason that we needed this little thing of playing with the note durations is to allow us to notate different rhythms between the two hands. To say, hey, I'm playing a quarter note in one hand, but an eighth note in the other. But hey, they're really both eighth notes. So the only reason we need to rely on that little thing is that we're trying to notate two hands at once in a single voice, but a roll is already using both hands. So we can get away with the longer note, and it's not going to cause us any problems because the hands can't be doing anything else while they're rolling. If you're Buddy Rich, you can go and do things like this, and then we'll start playing games where we force notes into other voices, but that's not the norm of drum notation. So this is basically the gist of the how to notate for drums. It's going to be in two voices, uh, the upper stems for hands, lower for feet. Now, there are situations where people might say, uh, we might want to force this snare drum into voice 2. And you can do that. You can absolutely do that. I'll use the shortcut Control Alt 2 to force it to voice 2. If I was back in my basic workspace, I'd be able to see my voice buttons better. And then I'd be able to just press the voice 2 button. Click this note, press my voice 2 button. And then I can go change these to quarter notes. Because here's the other thing. There's no reason to notate it as an eighth note if it's in a voice all by itself now. Why not notate it as a quarter note so I can eliminate that rest that came after it? So the normal rules of notation will apply regarding rest. You can't eliminate all rest, but I can certainly, an eighth note followed by a rest on the same beat could just be notated as a quarter note. So some people would say, let's do, because these two go together, bass, snare, bass, bass, snare, bass, snare, bass, bass, snare. Because those go together logically, some people will choose to notate those both stems down in the same voice and then put the ride cymbal on top of that. This is where it gets very subjective, and if you're not an expert at doing this, there's a good chance you're just going to create chaos and confusion. But I don't want to take away the value of this notation. This notation is perfectly good. Bass, snare, bass, bass, snare, bass, snare. That's a typical rock backbeat rhythm, and notating it with that stems down is valid as well, even though it's foot, hand, foot, foot, hand. Notating them both stems down because logically they're working together in that way is valid. And so the default drum, so you can move notes between voices like I just did, but you can also, when I go to note input mode here, you'll see there's an edit drum set button. If you know you're always going to want your snare drum in voice 2, you can click the edit drum set button and then find your snare, which is here. I found it because I'm looking at the shortcut is A. I need to actually make my dialogue bigger to really see all this stuff better. Can I not make those? I thought I could make these columns wider, but okay, it is what it is, I guess. Is it ever gonna? Yeah, I guess if you get it wide enough, you can eventually see the whole thing. Okay, acoustic snare A. So I can click this and tell it, instead of having the default voice be 1, you can tell it to make the default voice 2 if you want. And then from then on, every time you press the shortcut A or double click in the palette, it'll enter into voice 2. So if you know that in your particular piece it's going to work out to always have the snare in voice 2, do it. But again, don't do it unless you're an expert, unless you know drum notation already. If you're kind of new to the world of drum notation, the basic method that I started with, which is snare is done with the hands, so by gosh, I'm going to notate it in voice 1. It actually works really well, and drummers are quite accustomed to reading that, and it works pretty well because we might practice it that way. We might practice hands separately from feet also. So, for timpani, staccato, yes, for timpani, you would mark, if you want a staccato note, what you would do is you would hit it and then immediately dampen it with your hand like that. And that's for special effects, like on a floor tom, that can happen as well. Certainly for cymbal, you might hit a crash cymbal, let it ring for exactly 2 beats, and then muffle it with your hand. So for that, you might notate specific note durations. You would probably want to add some text that says choke at the end of it. So if I wanted to say like a crash cymbal, like let me enter a crash cymbal here. 7C is now my whole note. I'll make it a 6. Go back here and type 6C. So it's a half note. So this is a crash notated as a half note. But if a drummer saw that, they wouldn't necessarily know. Do you just mean hit it hard enough to last approximately 2 beats? Or do you mean to literally stop it at the end of the 2 beats? So what you would then do is you would write in the word choke here. I'm saying this because I think this is an effective way to do it. If there are any real drummers here, they might be able to say what's a better way of doing it. But this method of saying to kill the sound of that so that you can be real specific about when you're telling that note to stop ringing. Timpani, kind of the same thing, but timpani won't last as long, won't ring nearly as long as a cymbal. So just notating the half note and assuming that it's going to die is probably good enough. If you want it literally to be bop, then you'll notate it with a quarter note and a staccato, and then they will actually choke it. And choke is technically the word for what you're doing with a cymbal. Damp or dampen is the sound for what you do with your hand on a drum. But it's the same basic idea. All right, so I want to move on to showing the other notation that I used here, because this is quite common in jazz and rock, and I want to show you how to do this. In this notation, we're not telling a drummer everything to play. We're telling them kind of the key thing to do. We're telling them, hey, there's going to be that quarter note triplet thing to play. And sometimes you're telling them because you want them to play it. Sometimes it's not even that you want them to play it, but you want them to know that the guitar is playing those quarter note triplets. And then you want the drummer to know, hey, there's some quarter note triplets going on. You can either play along with those quarter note triplets or not, your choice. But you just want them to know what's happening. So sometimes we use this notation just to let them know approximately what's happening in the other instruments. So I want to show you how to enter this notation, because it's MuseScore makes it relatively easy to do, but really hard to figure out how to do if someone doesn't show you. So I'm going to show you. So here's the notation I'm entering. What I'm going to do is start by entering that accent rhythm on top. Okay? So I'm going to go to my drum set and I enter that rhythm. And I'm going to enter it on their drum. It's totally not going to matter because it's not actually going to play back or show on the snare staff, but it's just easy to enter it as snare. So I'll type 0, A, and then 6, Control 3 for my triplet, 0, A, A. Oops, I typed DD. Yeah, whatever. It ain't going to matter. I've entered the rhythm I want. All right? What I want to do now is yeah, it totally doesn't matter what these pitches are. So even though part of me wants to change it to snare drum, I know it doesn't matter. So I'm going to leave it alone. What I'm going to do next is select this measure, and I'm going to move those notes to voice 3. That's going to be an important step here. So I'm going to go to Tools, Voices, Exchange Voices 1 and 3. So now those notes are in voice 3. The reason I'm doing that is because MuseScore treats voice 3 very specially when it comes to the next command I'm going to do, which is Tools, Toggle Rhythmic / Notation. This is going to change the notation from what you see right now, where everything is like that's, you can see that snare, you can see those are ride cymbals, etc. When I do that, it changes everything to being above the staff like this. Now, when it did that, the triplet bracket is crooked. And I'm wondering if that's because these are, if it's like still thinking those are ride cymbals. So I'm going to change them to snares. When I did that, I'm just going to use the arrow. I'm using the arrow key to move through all the different sounds. There's the snare. Yeah, it's not changing anything. So yeah, it totally doesn't matter. It's still just going to have a crooked thing here. I'll tell you what I did in the other thing. I cheated. So if you want this thing to be straight, you would just have to drag it straight and kind of eyeball it. But what I did is I cheated. I said I'm just going to make all my triplets be horizontal, and there's a style setting for that. So you can go. So let me reset this guy now, and then I'm going to go to the Format, Style, Couplets, and then maximum slope 0. Slope, you may remember from math, is how slanted a line is. 0 means flat. So now I have my tuplet bracket flat. Of course, that's going to make all my triplets flat, and maybe I don't want all of them, but these were the only ones I had, so I was fine. So if you are just trying to make some triplets flat, you'll have to manually adjust them. But in any case, I now have that rhythm above the staff, looking the way I want it. So let me, again, undo some of those things so you can see what happened when I actually did the command. Okay, there it is. Um, this is when I moved it to voice 3, and now, bam, is the toggle rhythmic slash notation. So it moved the notes. I'll again undo that. It changed them from being notes on the staff and cross note heads and everything else that we would need to actually read it. If I redo the command, you'll see now everything is sort of floating on top of the staff, and it made them smaller, and it just made them all regular note heads. So uh, I see there's a question, and I'll come in and get that in a second. So this is what the uh, toggle rhythmic slash notation does. It puts these as little accent notes, as little accents on top, or hits, or kicks, we'll call them. An offshoot about the symbol notation, beaming over the rest. All right, I will come back to that since it's sort of a separate topic. But I want to finish this. I want to get those slashes in there now. So I already have the measure selected, right? I selected the measure, moved to voice 3, and then, in fact, let me just undo both of those changes so you can see the whole process. So this is, again, I've entered the rhythm. I will then tools, voices, exchange 1 and 3, and then tools, toggle rhythmic slash notation, and then tools, fill with slashes, which puts the slashes in the first unused voice, which is 3, which is 1. So now I have the notation I want, except for a bug. The bug is, if you notice, before I did the fill with slashes, these rests were sitting on top of the staff, all nice and all, but as soon as I did the fill with slashes, those rests fell. That's just a bug. But I'm going to fix that by selecting those rests and moving them up. Now, these rests are tricky to select because the slash is kind of overlapping them, and MuseScore thinks that the slash is an entire rectangle that's just covering that. So control click of the rest will select the rest even though it's underneath the slash. And now I'll just use the arrow keys to push them up. Control click, boom, boom, boom. So that is then the process here. You could also right click one of these things and say select all similar elements in staff, or better yet, select more same voice. And that will select all of the voice 3 rests. And then you could use the inspector to change them all at once. So that's how you enter this notation. It's actually quite simple. Normally I just enter it all with snare. All right, so now let's get to Malou's question. Yeah, so it did show up. It just didn't show up fast enough for me to see it. Can I do playback of some of these measures? So the question is, are you not hearing the playback? People were telling me before they were hearing the playback. Were you not hearing those notes? I would have thought that you were hearing that. Are you not hearing crashes? I guess I'll find out in a minute. Um, well, y'all will have to tell me. I'm not going to sit around and wait for that to catch up. So I'm going to now try to ask about the symbol notation, answer the question about the symbol notation. You want eighth, 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 rest, eighth. Gotcha. Okay, good. We're hearing the crashes. Good. So the only thing is that when you do the slash notation, it won't play, and that's on purpose because normally you don't want to hear those things. But that's all fixable in the inspector. I could go open my inspector. Whoops, not mixer, but F8 for inspector, and then turn play back on for that note, and then it'll play that note, right? So what that toggle rhythmic slash notation does is turn off the playback automatically, because usually you don't want to hear those things. But if you've entered them on the right notes, then by all means, and you want to hear them play back, you can do that. All right, so now I'm going to try to do the symbol thing. So it was a ride pattern, so it's going to be D, and it's eighth note, so 4, and she wants D, D, rest, D, and wants it beamed over the rest. So beaming over the rest is definitely doable, and actually, just for grins, let me just enter some more of these. D, D, rest, D. And now I'll go in and enter a bass also. If I enter bass, just 5, then B, rest, B, rest. If this is the pattern, then I will talk about beaming the rest in a second. Typically, though, there would actually be a snare there. And so if I want to put a snare there, I'm just going to put the snare there. Let the snare be that eighth note. Now, I pressed A, but I got the floor tom. That seems to be a bug also, where if something is selected on the palette, it enters that the first time you do it. I don't know exactly what just happened there, but it was a bug. That's all I know. So I'm going to select the snare on the palette first, and then type my A, and then go over here and type my A. So the rest will go away, right? That would be the typical pattern there. But if we don't want the snare there, and we decide we want to beam over that rest, here's how you do it. You click the rest, go over here to Beam Properties, and click the Beam Middle. This goes for all instruments. It's not specific to percussion. If you want to extend beams over rests like that. This is, I won't say it's a controversial practice, because I don't know anyone who's actively opposed to it. But there are people who think it's a good idea, and people who think it's not a good idea, or people who think it's not worth it. So I don't have a horse in that race. You know, I have opinions on a lot of things. You hear me express them often. I don't have an opinion on this. I typically don't bother beaming over these rests, typically, when they're only eighth rests. When we get down to sixteenths, somehow seeing two flags floating, multiple double flags floating around, starts to look messy. Then I'm more likely, and then the double flags on the notes and the double flags on the rest, it starts to look messy. But with eighth notes, I'm usually cool with not beaming over them. That's me. How do you turn on and off chord playback? So same way as you just saw for the notes. It's going to be the inspector. If I want to enter a chord symbol in here, so basically, if you're going to ask, for unrelated questions, best to save them up for next week when it's the Ask Me Anything session. But since I'm wrapping up here anyhow, I'll definitely entertain some questions. F8. So I select my chord symbol and then turn off playback, and now it won't play, right? And if I want none of my chord symbols to play back, I turn it off and then set as style, that S button. Now none of the chord symbols in that score will play back. So that's how you do. That's how you change playback stuff. How about copy and paste? So the thing is, copy and paste works fantastically, right? If I copy this and then paste it over here, I'm going to get exactly the same thing. What MuseScore is doing is it's copying this note here, which is a ride cymbal, and it becomes a ride cymbal in the destination. This note here is a bass drum. It becomes a bass drum in the destination. But now, what happens if I add another score that is only for triangle, say, another staff that's only for triangle? And now I try to copy that same rhythm onto the triangle staff. Let's copy it onto the triangle staff. Well, I'm going to get notes, but they aren't going to sound like triangles, because they weren't triangles before. They were two different pitches, right? This is a this was a ride cymbal, that was a bass drum. Now, this is no longer a ride cymbal. This is still a bass drum. That's because these are using different drum sets in the mixer. If I go to the mixer, you'll see this guy is the standard drum set. this guy is the orchestra kit. If I change this back to the standard kit, we're going to find out that it's back to being ride cymbals, right? MuseScore is going to preserve the sound when copying between staves. If you want the sound preserved, great, it's done. If you actually don't want to preserve the sound, if you want to change these notes into triangle notes, well, you're going to have to do that yourself. So select this and use the up arrow or down arrow. The up arrow and down arrow kind of move between the two sounds that are actually defined. So if I go to note input mode, you can see there's two sounds actually defined for triangle. There's the muted triangle and there's the open triangle. So if I have a measure selected and I use up or down arrow, it's just going to change all the notes between those two sounds. So it will convert whatever sound you originally had to one of these two new sounds. There's no artificial intelligence in the world that would be able to guess which sound did you want that ride cymbal to turn into, which sound did you want that bass drum to turn into, right? MuseScore can't guess of the multiple sounds that exist on one staff, which of those sounds should map into the multiple sounds that exist on another staff. There is no artificial intelligence that can do that, but your intelligence can do it yourself. So now I have open sound. If I'd rather have the muted sound, now I have the muted sound, right? So that's the deal. So there's no problems. It's just lack of artificial intelligence to guess what you meant. If MuseScore is going to keep the same sounds. If you want new sounds, because there was multiple sounds possible on the old staff, multiple sounds possible on the new staff, you're going to have to choose which of the old sounds you want to map to which of the new sounds, and so forth. So copying and pasting between parts is maybe not, basically you should enter the notes onto the staff you wanted. So the triangle sounds, I'm not quite sure what you're asking, Malou, but when I press N to go to note input mode, down here on the drum palette is where it's showing you the sounds, because that's how you would enter those sounds, right? This is where I've been going to all session long. I press N for note input mode, and while I'm in note input mode, this palette shows up down here, and then I can either double click notes to enter them, or I can click the palette and then click in the score, or I can just use the shortcut that it's telling me, A and B, A and B. So the drum palette is how you can see the kind of key that goes with that set, and that goes with that instrument, and that's also how you enter the notes themselves. So that's basically. My name is covering things up. I see what you're saying. Yeah, I see what you're saying. On the screen share, it's telling you that it's my screen share. Yeah, you know what? That's a really good point. So. Someone else had already pointed out that there used to be a logo or a little button that says live that was covering important stuff up, and I figured out how to make that go away, and I'm going to make a note to myself to do the same here. So actually my note to myself is just going to consist of me sticking something on my shoulder because I'm silly. No, it's going to be putting this clip on my watch band. This is my reminder to self. It's the string around the finger, except I don't have a string handy. This is my reminder to self to see if I can make my name not show up on my screen share next time. All right, that's drum set notation, guys and gals. So something, what I normally do in notating for drums is I don't notate everything fully. I use that slash notation a lot. But you will notice that the MuseScore theme music has it fully notated. And I'm going to go ahead and when I play the music out, let you look at the music, the notation here. But you'll see I'm using a lot of different sounds, right? Starts off with those 4 bass drum hits. And then there's different cymbals and snares and things going on here, but I'm using that stems up for hand, stems down for feet thing, crash. I am using all these same things that we've seen. Here's a drum roll. Right? right? Ring. And here's an example of me not beaming across my eighth rests, right? And then here's a typical little fill that's like running down the toms. Ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum. Let's listen to that. Brum, brum. That's a little typical thing. Um, so little cup. Not sure what you're asking, Malou there, but yeah, you can come back and ask that at next week's Ask Me Anything session. Maybe if you can show me exactly what you're talking about by, finding it in the playback video, finding the exact place in the video, so I can go there again and see it. But that's the show. So I hope you've enjoyed the session. Meanwhile, I'm going to play out the theme, and we're going to watch the drum part go by. So thanks everyone for being here. Thanks for the questions and comments. This is again Marc Sabatella of Mastering MuseScore. Today, August 31st. I know that date today. With the MuseScore Café, talking about drum notation. So talk about, the idea that maybe we don't write every last note down for the drummer necessarily, unless you are trying to do that. Here I did it for playback purposes. Sometimes you do it because you're trying to make a real accurate transcription. So sometimes you write out everything, but often use that slashes with the accents above it. So I showed you how to do both of those. They're both really useful techniques to know about. So next week will be Ask Me Anything. So by all means, start saving up your questions, start thinking about them, maybe write them down to yourself. If I'm going to need to see a specific score of yours to answer the question, make sure you post it to the community. Just post it in the conversation space here. And then you'll, then I'll be able to see your score and say, and then you'll be able to tell me, hey, in measure 23, how do I do the blah, blah, blah? And then I can open your score and go to measure 23 and we can look at it together. So, that's what we'll be looking at. As a little heads up, I think pretty good chance MuseScore 4 will be in beta sometime by the week after that. So it's very possible the week after that we'll be looking at MuseScore 4 beta, and I'll be able to show you some new playback stuff. If not then, very soon thereafter. So looking forward to that, because the new playback stuff, still haven't heard, but Martin is assuring me, Tantic is assuring me it's going to be amazing. So thanks everyone, and I will see you next time. Definitely come join us for the Music Masterclass tomorrow.